Elon Musk has been a fairly controversial figure for a while now, and for the most part, to be honest, I agree with a lot of what he has to say, even if I don't necessarily understand all of the hype around Tesla. But today is not about Tesla, it is about Twitter. Elon's antics on Twitter and what's just happened over the last few days, which could have seriously huge consequences for democracy in the West and the state of the internet as a whole. So what exactly happened over the last couple of days? Well, Elon came out with a couple of tweets which started with this one. Free speech is essential to a functioning democracy. Do you believe Twitter rigorously adheres to this principle? Over 2 million votes, with over 70% of those people, that's 1.4 million people, thinking Twitter does not adhere to the principle of free speech. Elon then tweeted, "The consequences of this poll will be important, please vote carefully." Then he said, "Given that Twitter serves as the de facto public town square, failing to adhere to free speech principles fundamentally undermines democracy. What should be done?" Finally, he said, "Is a new platform necessary?" Now, it isn't too hard to see what Elon is angling here. It seems clear. Elon is unhappy with the state of Twitter and social media as a whole, as are many other people, and he thinks it's time for change, and he might even be the one to create that change. But what's the background to this, and what could we see come as a result of it? So where does this controversy start? Well, since social media took off and actually the internet grew as well, there's been a debate as to whether websites like Facebook and Twitter are publishers or platforms. If they are publishers, then basically anything written on the websites is being pushed out by the website itself, so that company is liable for what's being said, and Twitter or Facebook have to censor or filter or edit the content on their sites to abide by laws, or else they will be held liable for anything said. If they are platforms, then they are not liable for anything posted on their websites because they are merely a platform for other people to project their own views. Now, pretty much all of these social media companies in unison want to be considered platforms, not publishers, because frankly, they don't want to be held responsible for what's posted on their sites. But as social media has grown and developed into one of the most valuable, dominant industries in the world, and it has billions of users now, the governments of the world have started to force these companies to self-censor their content. For some things, almost everyone agrees this is a good thing. Things like terrorist propaganda from ISIS. 99% of people agree that that should be identified at the source and deleted and kept off Twitter and Facebook before it even goes online. But for other things, it's less clear-cut. Things like Donald Trump being able to tweet things. There are people who believe he should be allowed to do that and those who think he shouldn't. The reality is here, though, that in recent years, governments and the US government in particular have already sort of designated these companies as publishers by making them self-censor, and so they're on the back foot here in trying to be considered platforms. The fact that they are already deciding what gets to go public, what gets a fact check underneath it, and so forth, suggests that actually they are behaving as publishers, so there's a good chance that they will be treated as publishers by the government. Now, the other controversy, particularly around Twitter here, and something that Elon mentioned in those tweets, is regarding the right to free speech and what constitutes hindering that right. The basic argument here is that Twitter today in the US is equivalent to the public forum of ancient Rome, a digital version of a place where people go to be heard, and that by banning people from Twitter, it's like banning them from speaking at all. The counter-argument here is that Twitter is its own company and it can decide who is on it for itself, which is the current situation and why Twitter is actually able to ban Donald Trump while allowing literal murderers like the Taliban to publish their propaganda. It's up to Twitter's discretion as of right now. To be honest, the influence that these tech companies hold is so huge that if you are banned from all of these sites, it is very difficult to get your words out, and I personally can see the argument that Twitter has evolved into a public forum. Just look at how journalists or politicians use Twitter as their primary point of contact for making their message known. Banning someone from that outlet instantly cuts down the amount of people they can reach by 99%, and that could be seen as inhibiting free speech. Personally, I think this will become a major talking point during the next US presidential election, especially if a certain presidential candidate isn't allowed back on social media. We will probably get first-hand evidence that will show us just how influential social media is, and it may well be the case that in the future it's impossible to win an election without being present on social media, at which point an argument could be made that these companies like Twitter and Facebook are public goods, they're public forums, and they cannot inhibit free speech. Now, what might Elon actually do here, though? It's clear he thinks that there's a problem, and it's clear that his followers or supporters certainly seem to support him in that assertion, so what might we see in the future? Well, the first possibility is that Elon buys Twitter itself. It's a $30 billion company. Elon doesn't have that in cash, but he could probably find it. The problem here is that it's a public company, so there would be slippage when buying it. The price would rise the more shares he buys, and that could make it very difficult to actually buy a controlling share. It also has individuals or corporations, institutions with large controlling interests as well, and he would have to wrest control from those other shareholders. There are also board members of the company who are distinct opponents to free speech, like Jack Dorsey. To be honest, this is a very difficult thing to do, and I personally think it's unlikely that this is the direction Elon tries to go. It's also worth noting that from Elon's point of view, and a lot of other people's point of view as well, Twitter is already corrupted and already has a bad reputation. Now, another option is that Elon joins another company that's trying to make a change, one like Rumble, Locals, or Truth. These companies are growing decently, nothing incredible, but they are seeing sufficient growth. It is hard to compete in this industry though. Elon jumping on board with a company like Truth could be hugely influential, but not without its problems. These companies are essentially forced to run similar rules to that of Twitter and Facebook by other companies like Google and Apple, as if they refuse to, they'll be taken off those app stores and effectively killed. The same can also be seen with companies selling server space. There is essentially a cartel of big tech companies against this sort of platform, and they withhold their services knowing that no one else can provide those services because the economies of scale just aren't there. Now, the third option here, and the one that I think is personally most likely, is that Elon just builds out his own company. It would be very easy for him to grow at first. Elon is hugely influential, and he would instantly acquire millions of users without a doubt. There are also loads of computer engineers, software developers, people like that, saying that it would actually be relatively easy to create a platform to compete with Twitter, and honestly, I believe that. The Twitter algorithm for finding new content is god awful, for instance. The UI and the basic functionings of the website and the app is fine, but nothing that Elon couldn't compete with his massive resources. The problem here is sort of the chicken versus the egg problem. People only switch to new platforms if the audience is there, and the audience only switches if the influential people switch. It is hard to fight that, but with Elon's name and with the support that he'd likely get from other hugely influential people like Joe Rogan, I wouldn't be surprised if Elon could make it work. Now, there is another problem here, and that is government intervention. One of the big reasons for this problem in the first place with social media and big tech is that governments are forcing the intervention of these companies to enforce certain rules. There is a lot of pressure from the US government in particular to self-censor from these companies, because if big tech doesn't censor themselves, the government will do it for them. That is probably why all major tech companies who sell server space refused to work with Rumble in 2021, effectively shutting the company down. The idea here is that Rumble's existence encourages Democrats to mandate or legislate this sort of stuff, and that's bad for these mega tech companies like Apple, Facebook, and Google, who would rather make that decision themselves. There's a decent chance that there would be opposition here from other big tech companies. Apple might take Elon's app off the App Store. Amazon might refuse to run their server spaces or to work with any company who does. Twitter even might act banning people from advertising that new platform on Twitter. These are all very real possibilities and problems that Elon will no doubt be thinking about as he makes his decision. Another problem with this idea is that the Democrats will not be in power forever. Whether they lose that power in 2024, 28, or maybe even 2032, the Republicans will get into power again at some point in the future, and there's a very good chance that they will act against big tech anyway and mandate free speech policies. If Trump is re-elected, that's actually practically a certainty after he was banned from Twitter. Maybe if different Republican candidates come to power, something less strong comes to fruition. Who knows right now, but that is a possibility and a risk. If Elon builds his platform on free speech principles, if he invests tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars into this, and then the Republicans win the elections and mandate these rules anyway, Elon's platform loses all advantage. Now finally, I want to make a quick note on Elon himself, because most people, especially on YouTube, don't seem to understand who he really is. Some claim that he is a rocket scientist, that he's instrumental to SpaceX's success, that Falcon X and Falcon 9 are basically his brainchild, but that is not at all true, I'm afraid. He has hardly any impact on the day-to-day operations of SpaceX, and only really controls big picture direction stuff like, let's build a rocket to get to Mars. The exact same situation is true with Tesla as well. He has practically no input on cars themselves. He doesn't have anything to do with building out the AI for Tesla self-driving either. He isn't actually an engineer, as a lot of people claim. He has no formal background in that area, and he's never worked as an engineer. One thing he did actually do was help to build PayPal and X.com, but that was over 20 years ago and it was just some computer software development stuff, and that's not really who he is anymore. Now, I'm not saying this to diminish his accomplishments, but to celebrate his actual accomplishments. Elon is the best capital allocator in history. Number one, no questions asked. He is the best delegator in history. Again, no questions asked. At finding talent, at finding and selecting and identifying the best people in the world and allowing that talent to thrive, he is the most efficient in the world. With a fraction of NASA's budget, Elon built a team that built the most cost-efficient rockets in history in a decade as well, and that is a ridiculous achievement. Elon's ability to identify where capital should go, where money is best spent, is literally unparalleled, and that is the secret to his success. What he is doing right now is trying to gauge if building new social media is an appropriate allocation of his capital. If he deems it so, if he thinks it's worthwhile, he will almost definitely be right and create another huge success, even though he won't actually have much to do with building the platform itself, just broad strategic direction and building out a team who will build the teams who will actually win. Now, if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to bless the YouTube algorithm. If you want more content like this, then check out our Patreon and join our community of investors. You get access to our Discord, loads of exclusive content like insight into my portfolio and buy and sell alerts for all my own investments. There's a link in the description to masterworks.io, a site that allows you to buy fractional shares of art from world-famous artists like Banksy, which can be a great way to diversify your portfolio with non-market correlated assets. It's completely free to sign up, so if that sounds interesting, then make sure to check it out. There's also a link in the description to BlockFi, which will give you up to $250 in free Bitcoin when you use it. You can also get 9% interest on stablecoins like USDC, which is a far higher rate than you get from any savings account these days. Just make sure not to use Tether. Thank you all for the support. Thanks for watching. Stay stoic. Until next time.